What's up YouTube, Capital G here. We're talking Infernoids in this video, and the reason we're talking about Infernoids is because the deck just pulled off one of the most improbable runs you will ever see in Yu-Gi-Oh! YCS Dallas just wrapped up a few hours ago, and this is the deck that took it. Eric Christensen was the pilot of this deck, and I mean, the guy went on a run where he was just literally on fire. He went 16-0, and this is one of the most unlikely things that I think I've ever seen in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because this was the only Infernoid deck that actually made the top 32 cut. So like the odds of him actually even getting to like top 8 were pretty slim, but then to actually win the events and to do it in such commanding fashion when you're pretty much the only person running the deck, the only representative, it's mind-blowing. Now I looked at the deck, I had to find out like what was he running. I had to look at it and think like, you know, did he break the mold? Was this finally going to be that build of Infernoids? And you know, there is some definite, like there is some player preference tech in here, and I think that this is a very solid build. It looks like he cut a lot of the clutter out. Like I used to think that things like Lumina were just like absolute staples, but then it's like, if you think about Lumina, you know, I play Infernoids a lot. I kind of play a janky troll version of the deck, but you know, it's a card that can often be dead, whereas Raiden and Lila are, you know, they're cards that are kind of self-efficient. Like you don't need anything with a Lila for it to go on the board and do some work. You just summon it and blow up one of your opponent's floodgates cards. You know, oh, you have Iron Wall? Okay, well, no, you don't. Oh, you have Vanity's locking me out? Okay, no, you don't. You know, you summon a Raiden by itself, mill a couple of good cards, and you potentially win. And of course, with Infernoids, which I like to think of as Firelight Sworn, there's of course going to be some luck factor. I mean, I don't think that it is out of the realm of possibility to think that he sacked probably a few of his games, and maybe he won a couple of games that he shouldn't have. But when somebody goes 16-0, I mean, there's no way around it. It's freaking impressive. Like, it's hard enough to go to a regional and, you know, maybe you'll probably have that like one undefeated player who goes like 8-0 or something like that. You're talking double. Like, you're talking this guy essentially did that and then went 8 more rounds of just not even dropping at all. And I looked at his build and I'm just like, you know, he's got some tech in here that I don't think anybody ever thought about, like rekindling. And with him running rekindling, at first I'm like, wait, I mean, it's just Decatron, right? Like, isn't that the only card? And sure enough it is. But I think I undervalued this card. I think Decatron is literally starting to be the whole freaking show when it comes to this deck, because it's not even just that Decatron is a foolish burial for the deck. It's not even that it allows you to actually do something when your opponent has that Vanities, or, you know, a card that's not letting you play, specifically Vanities, because it is a monster you can normal summon. I think it's the fact that this card can just be any Infernoid. Like, it just copies any of the effects. If your opponent has a big monster that you can't get around, you just send this card, you send Antra to the graveyard and you just bounce it. You know, you send Patrulia to the graveyard and you just blow up, you know, the floodgate that's hurting you or something like that. So I think Antra is, or excuse me, I think Decatron is becoming like pretty much the most important Infernoid. And it used to be Patru. I thought Patru was like the best card, but I don't know, man. Decatron is looking really good, and it's starting to show why people are willing to play, of course, 1-for-1. But I mean, maybe Rekindling is starting to be like the next kind of like pseudo staple in this deck. Now, I actually read some of his feature match. Like, I read the finals where he played against Burning Abyss, and his opponent was main decking multiple copies of Mind Crush, which against this deck is pretty much useless because Infernoids don't search pretty much at all. Like, you're never really going to know what's in their hand. All you can do is just kind of guess. Their summons do not start chain, so you'd have to just randomly flip over a Mind Crush and be like, do you have Untundel? You know, like, you will never really know what they have in their hand. But, you know, it has a good matchup against Burning Abyss because all of those effects that like to trigger in the graveyard, you basically are playing an entire deck with DD Crow monsters, so you can just get rid of all of them multiple times. Well, there were a couple of times in the game where his opponent had, you know, a Skarm in the graveyard, and I'm just like, you're not going to resolve a Skarm against Infernoids. Like, it's just not going to happen. And another card that a lot of people probably never took note of, and I'm guilty of this too, Mischief of the Gnomes. It is a Xyz killer. Not only is it just an Xyz killer, but you don't have to draw it. You can actually mill it from Reasoning, and you can still trigger it from the graveyard. So this card absolutely just destroyed Burning Abyss. It was like, oh, well, you summon a Skarm, and then you're gonna special summon a Graph. Okay, well, banish Mistress of the Gnomes. You know what I mean? What are you gonna exceed into? A rank 2 or something like that? Like, they can't exceed, so then they can't really do anything. You see that he had the synchro, or excuse me, the fusion hates, where he's got, like, you know, anti-shadow stuff. And I think that this card is going to become like a little bit of a sneaky staple. Like side frame Omega is so good, and it's really good against Necros too, because there are situations where, you know, your opponent might be like, activate Necros Mirror, and you know that they want to summon a Trishula or a Valkyris, and maybe they only have like 1 or 2 cards in their hand. Okay, you can chain Omega, and maybe you end up banishing that Trish or that Valkyris out of their hand, and then their play basically just fizzles, and it's like, oh well, I get my monster back on my next turn. Your Trishula goes back to your hand and you can't summon it. Basically does nothing. Your entire turn was basically a wash. So I don't know what to think. I think we're gonna have to look at Infernoids and think it's on the radar now. I think it's on the radar of one of those decks that can potentially tear stuff up. I mean, this could be a situation where the guy got completely lucky, but when somebody goes 16-0, I just don't think that's all luck. You know what I mean? I think he cut out a lot of the clutter in the deck. You see that he chose to run things like Card Trooper over what we talked about, Lumina. Card Trooper is yet another card that's just self-efficient. You know what I mean? You summon it on the board, it lets you mill a couple of cards, and then when it dies, almost always it's going to let you draw another card. So it replaces itself. And he ran a very tight Lightsworn engine of just 3 cards. So, you know, there wasn't like a super reliance. There was never really going to be a time where he should ever have 2 Lightsworn cards in his hand. You know what I mean? Unless maybe he opened with Lila and then he drew Charge of the Light Brigade. But outside of that, like, he was never going to draw 2, you know, Raidens or a Raiden and a Lila, where it's like, oh man, I have to use my summon on this, and then I've got this card stuck in my hand for the game, and you know, I can't get them both out. I also thought Torrential was really smart. I don't think that there's another trap. I don't even think Solemn Warning would be as high as Torrential, because Torrential is just, it's mass removal. You know, if you send it to the graveyard, it's not that big of a deal. Mystical Space Typhoon is already pretty bad against Infernoid, so I think 1 power trap is probably enough. I think that his side deck was really good. He obviously had the Burning Abyss like matchup on lock with these cards right here, the Mystic of the Gnomes, and then you have things like your standard Mistake for like Necros and whatnot. And his extra deck was really good too. You know, whenever you play Infernoids, you always have to remember to include some vanillas. Like you see, he ran Gaia Knight, the Force, First of the Earth, and people will wonder, like, why do Infernoids run, you know, Scrap Archfiend? Like, why do they still run Gem Knight Pro? And it's simply because it lets you get around the effect of not being able to summon when your opponent, or when you have monsters, affect monsters on the field. Like, it lets you essentially work around the whole only rank, or only, you know, ranks up to 8 and stars up to 8. You know what I mean? It lets you get around that. Like, you know, these vanilla monsters, they don't count towards your star/rank maximum like levels. So you can still summon this, have Untundle on the field, or have Stydamus on the field, and then summon an Untundle, because your Gem Knight Pearl doesn't count, your Gaia Knight doesn't count. So I think that this is interesting. I think that you're going to see, like, you're automatically going to see a spike of Infernoids. So if you hate going against Infernoids, don't play Duel on the Network. Don't play Duel on the Network this week, because you're going to see a lot of Infernoids, and probably for the next couple of weeks at regionals, you're going to see a lot of Infernoids. But I'm wondering what you guys think. Do you think that Eric broke the mold, or do you think that this was luck? I tend to lean towards he may have figured something out, because I just don't think you go 16-0 off of luck. So let me know what you guys think. Thank you for watching, as always.